All right, so welcome. You all are fresh off the keynote, and you're here today to talk about administration and governance. My name is James Olenek. I'm a Principal PM Director on the PowerApps, Flow, and Common Data Service team. My team owns all the administrative framework, all of our management plane. And I have Kent Weir from Inner Pipeline here, who's here to talk about and make real a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, talk about how he's driven kind of a modernization and implementation of PowerApps and Flow at his company. And we're going to be switching to him along as we go through the session today. And why are we here? Similar spiel, similar icons you've seen in the keynote, but really what we're here today is we're going to be focusing more on the purple and blue on that screen. We're going to be focusing on PowerApps and Flow, specifically from the lens of management, the lens of governance, the lens of administration. And if you came to the pre-day yesterday, you're going to see some similar best practices I'm going to cover today, but hopefully you also gain some insight from Ken, kind of giving you the point of view from the other side of like what it means to actually practically apply some of this stuff today. And so I just want to start off with, who here is an Office admin? Oh. What about a Dynamics 365 service admin? All right. What about Azure admin? Better yet, everyone raise their hand. All right. Yeah, everyone raise your hand. No, keep them raised, keep them raised. All right. Lower your hand if your company is less than 10,000 people. All right. Less than 1,000 people. Less than 100 people. Less than 10 people? Whoa. I mean, I think that really cements the fact that the Power Platform is not only just catching great hold, it's getting great traction, but look at the wide swath of different people that are here to talk about the Power Platform. You have every edge of the ecosystem, Office to Azure in the cloud for Microsoft, and every size company out there, which is really amazing. And when you're really thinking around, and I've been at the PowerApps team, I joined when private preview, so like over 3 years ago. And you know, I came from like a very pro dev space. I came from Windows Phone development and Windows development. I worked on kind of our dev center. And I was, you know, maybe not a full believer in the low-code revolution, but I do have to say, you know, the first 2 years, they made a believer of me. I really mean that. But even more so, something that was very interesting to me is this year, something has changed. Something has started to change, and those power addicts, those power users within the company, probably a lot of you here today, have driven change. And we're starting to get, to put this into practical terms, at the first Ignite we didn't have a session on admin. We had just one admin center, basic admin center. Next Ignite, I was in a room with maybe that section with 30 people in it. Last Ignite, I was in a room with 800 people. And we're at MBAS, the second MBAS ever, right? And there was over 800 people pre-registered to this session. Like, just put that into perspective. And the reason why is because all those power addicts out there, all those power users, you individuals who are coming and trying to be more productive, trying to drive change within your company, you're actually driving that change. Global companies, your whole business unit, you're starting to come and you're saying, okay, what does it mean to actually roll out Power Platform at scale, roll out Power Apps at scale, Flow at scale? You know, a lot of you even have gone through a similar evolution from Power BI, and you're coming here, hey, how can I go apply that to Power Apps and Flow? And really, that I get in droves, in email, talking to people at the booth and conferences, they want to know, okay, like, well, how do I do security right? How do I handle compliance? How do I convince people within my company to get out of that, no by default, attitude and bring it into the new age? Like, focus on enablement versus kind of focusing on just like protection and protection just by know first. Right? Not even for very good reasons. And these more and more complex challenges, they keep coming as we start to engage with all of you that, you know, you're in industries with legal concerns, compliance concerns. Like, the world is getting more complex, and as you roll this out at scales that we haven't done before, you know, there are more and more challenges, right? And that's awesome. And that's part of like what my team is specifically focused on is really governance, right? And governance from the perspective of, you know, how can IT enable those people, enable the movement of power users within their organization? And where I actually want to really start here, and this actually comes up in a lot of the conversations that I have with customers and a lot of you, which is our perspective from a team and from a product is that we are really about empowering people. We are about empowering people to build, right? But my team's job and what I'm here to talk about is, our goal, our culture, it also includes a story around how IT can enable, or even, decentralized IT can govern that adoption, right? And really the approach that we're taking and everything you're gonna see today and every topic that I'm gonna talk about is really coming from the point of view of allowing you to get ahead of that adoption, providing you full visibility, full control over what people do, such that you can incent the right behavior, such that you can get ahead of that and have a strategy, right? And have a strategy that works for that 95%, and then you get to treat those 5 or less percent as exceptions, right? And we'll talk about that. And sometimes 95% of the work isn't at 5%, but we're going to talk about a lot of those tools that are at your disposal throughout the presentation today. And Kent's going to talk about practically how that's applied in his actual company. Okay? So cool. So you're going to be confident. You're going to be like, I know I have a checklist for governance at the end of this day. You're going to understand kind of hopefully at minimum, what some of the tools that we have available. And I'm going to give you a bunch of homework around things to go download, things to go read at the end of this day. But hopefully you kind of get a sense of the cultural change that you're going to need to have to drive and get ahead of if you really want to go drive the right change and support the right PowerApps culture within your company. Cool. So these are the 10 things we're going to cover today. It is a ton of content, so I'm going to be talking really fast. We are not going to go in as much detail into kind of what I consider like the fourth step of governance. You go from secure, monitor, alert, action, and deploy. The deploy and the ALM and DevOps, we're not going to go into a lot of detail in this particular section. But Evan and Mehdi have a great session. I think it's later today. So please attend that if you're really curious around what our DevOps story or what our automation and management story is there. But we're going to dig in from a security perspective, and we're going to cover those first 4 here. And I think the place that I really love to start, and I've kind of beaten this to death, but really start from where do apps and flows actually come from? Because one of the most important things, especially if you're not as experienced in the Power Platform, is where do apps actually come from? How do people actually go use this? Where are all these things showing up in my tenant? And how do people get access to it? And so the first thing to understand is that PowerApps and Flow are included, and we have a part of our service included as a part of the Office 365 and Dynamics 365 licenses. And it's for the purpose specifically of customizing those experiences. So a lot of you here today, probably the ones that raised their hand for the Office 365 admins, are here probably because we are the customization solution for SharePoint Online. We're the replacement for InfoPath and Workflow and Designer within SharePoint. So PowerApps and Flow are replacing those solutions. Right? And you're here today to understand that. You could be a Dynamics 365 administrator because PowerApps is the customization solution for those Dynamics apps. And another reason why, and this might be behind a lot of the concerns that you're here today, is because we also provide individuals a way of getting started outside of those Office 365 and Dynamics 365 experiences that they can customize. Individuals can sign up for trials. They can sign up for Flow Free. They can sign up for the PowerApps community plan and get their own developer environment that's shared scope to just them, but they can get started. They can learn skills. They can start building on the platform. And if you're farther down the spectrum and you've actually adopted PowerApps or Flow, even just within one business, you're probably familiar that we have standalone licenses that if you want to build more complex standalone apps or workflows, that you have to actually have a paid and standalone license. You're probably worried about creating other separate environments and DevOps and ALM, as we're going to talk about later. But what you should understand to start off with is that people can get started building right away. It kind of goes back to that culture conversation we talked about. And it's why some of the best practices that I'm going to talk about today are so critical for you to go back and immediately apply within your company, because people might already be starting to get started and test out and kick the tires of the service. And where we're going to be starting today, we have a crazy swath of different portals that we support. We have license management through the Office experience, or if you're a partner, going through the Partner Center. We have the maker portals that are make.powerapps.com and flow.microsoft.com, where people build apps and flows. And where we're going to be spending a little bit of time today is on our administrative plane. So we have a Dynamics Admin Center, a PowerApps Admin Center, and a Flow Admin Center. And one of the top questions I get is, geez, James, can you just give me one place to go? And so that's actually something that our team is working towards for October, which is consolidating all those administrative experiences into the Power Platform Admin Center. And those admin centers are where we're going to be spending a lot of our time today. And one of the most important experiences that those admin centers provide, and one of the most important concepts if you get nothing out of today but understand environments, which is really the key concept that we kind of hinge all of our governance story for PowerApps and Flow, and for even spans into Dynamics 365. And environments are a very, very key partitioning and container of all the assets that are created within our service. Even in our scenarios where we customize Office and SharePoint, all of those assets that are created, that are hosted in those experiences, they still live within an environment. They must. And they actually live within the default environment that we're going to talk about, and it's visualized in the middle here, that's created automatically. And these environments are so important because they provide a very powerful partitioning construct that's not only a container, but also an important scope for ALM, right, and DevOps, and also for permissions, as we're going to get to in a second. And just to kind of run you through the gambit of some of the key things to understand about environments is, number one, they're tied to a geographic location. All those assets you store within there tied to that location. And that's very important for concerns, especially if you're storing data within the common data service that can be provisioned within an environment in our data platform, because that data is going to be tied to that resident location, tied to that geo. As we've talked about, you actually can create separate environments. Because they're that scope for management and for movement, they're also useful, and permission, they're also useful from an ALM and DevOps process. If you attend the session later, you're going to kind of learn a lot about that. And they're also important from a policy perspective as we get into DLP policies later on today. We're going to dig into that as well. And what's important is there's one environment that's created automatically. That's called the default environment. But there's also, if customers are licensed to provision separate environments, they actually can create separate production environments, just for many of the purposes I've talked about already. And today, you actually get two production environments for PowerApps Plan 2 or Flow Plan 2 license. And that will be changing later this month, where it's going to be driven based on your available capacity that you purchase within your service. And we have a great blog post that was posted a month ago online to kind of talk through that. And what we actually are launched as well in that blog post is, today, any user can go and create a PowerApps environment if they have a P2 license. And so what we've actually introduced is a tenant setting that you can apply that will restrict it to only service admins being able to provision those environments, if that's something that you want to manage from a DevOps perspective. And so, I'm passing the environments at a very high level of granularity. But I think the most important thing to understand there is they're very, very important for the organization of resources within your organization, and how you kind of manage and deploy your applications. And another reason why you might want to create separate environments is really our security model, right? And this is, like, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here today, but if you remember anything about security, just remember 5+1, right? Which is, like, these are the various different layers of control that you have around the PowerApps system as it pertains to giving people access to different assets. At the top, because PowerApps and Flow are just another Azure AD application, you can use conditional access if you want to control which users can access the service, where they can access it, just like you would any other service that leverages Azure Active Directory. And then we have kind of like through 2 through 4 there, you have kind of like the more granular roles that exist within that environment construct that I've belabored enough. First, you have what we call environment roles. These are roles such as environment maker, environment admin, or system administrator, as it's known in CDS. And these provide privileges around what can be done at the scope of the environment. If someone has an environment maker permission, they can create new assets, such as Canvas apps and flows within the environment. If someone's an environment administrator, they have full access to all assets that have been created within that environment. And that's a very important concept because, for example, what an environment maker doesn't do is it doesn't give you access to any apps that have been created already, either from an edit permission or user permission. We don't automatically escalate that privilege to that role. And that's why the resource permissions are so important. That's going down to number 3 here, is because you share apps and flows within our service just like you would a document within SharePoint. So just the person who creates an app, who is an environment, say they're an environment maker in the environment, they create an app, but then they have to explicitly share it with someone for them to have access to it, either to collaborate on it or for that user to consume it. And moving farther down the stack, we have what we call CDS roles. So if you provision CDS within an environment, CDS is our data platform. It comes with a rich set of security capabilities. It has row-level security, field-level security, and if you provision CDS within an environment, the environment roles that exist are actually captured as a part of that rich ecosystem. And what's really, really cool around CDS, especially when you're building more complex model-driven apps and workflows, is you actually can build custom roles to access specific data or specific roles for different types of applications. Very, very powerful security. And then another thing that actually we announced late last year is the ability to control across which tenants your different PowerApps and Flow data can be accessed through. So as we'll talk about, I don't think I get into the details here, but but I can share more afterwards. If you want to actually restrict, for example, PowerApps and Flows that are deployed in another tenant from accessing your tenant data, you actually can apply that control today. And there's also an AAD control for outbound connections that you can set at the AAD level as well. And that kind of goes to like part of the power of being a part of the Azure AD ecosystem as well. And one of the things that I want to just kind of nail home is that all of that security that I've talked about, all of those 5 layers, they don't matter anything if you don't actually think through, especially if you're moving a lot of your data from on-prem to the cloud, how that data is secured at rest. Because one important thing to understand is, yes, we have 250 connectors to different Microsoft data, external data, but we don't escalate privilege. That user is using their credentials to access that data. We're calling in a lot of senses the same public APIs that exist today for Exchange and Office. And so at its core, you still must think through that strategy, which I'm sure most of you already are, around how you're securing that data already today based on the tools that people can build. Cool. But that being said, PowerApps and Flow, we are lowering the bar for application and flow development. We're making it way easier for people to build, people that haven't built before. And so we are committed to continuing to build new capabilities around how you can actually prevent the wrong data from leaking out through the wrong sources. And so something that we actually have had for quite some time, and we've evolved since then, as well I'll talk about later, is something called the data loss prevention policies. And basically, these are policies that you can define within your environment. You can either define them as a tenant admin or a service admin, and they can apply across all your environments or your entire tenant. Or as an environment admin, you can define it as applying to just a specific environment that you have access to. And really what this is, it's a recipe for the different types of apps and flows that can be deployed within a given environment or based off of the scope of that policy that you've defined. And the way you do it is you actually separate those connectors into 2 categories, and Kent's going to walk us through one of the examples that he's set up. And basically the crux of it is that no app and flow can be built that uses a connector that spans and jumps that gap between business data and non-business data. So in this example, I can't build an app that uses SQL Server in conjunction with OneDrive, for example, or Dropbox in this case, right? But I can use them, build apps and flows that leverage connectors within a particular group, right? And so it allows you to categorize your data into what you're actually using in your company to store your data today versus what you don't want to. And because you can apply these policies to be inclusive or exclusive of environments, you actually can start to have policies that you can evolve over time. So you can have a default policy for your own tenant, and then as you create more environments for particular purposes that maybe do need exceptions for some reason or another, you can actually build a process to exclude them and apply unique policies for that. And so like almost one of the most important things that I would urge people to do today is that if you haven't already set up a policy, a default policy for your entire tenant, you should go home and think through even tonight and do that. And it really will depend on your company, on what you store for your business data. And I think Ken has some slides around how he's thought about that for his company to kind of give you a starting point. And one other thing that we've launched earlier this year, and it's really on that commitment to continue to evolve our data loss prevention framework, was we also added more granular support for control over custom connectors that are created within our service and some of the HTTP actions that are applicable, especially within the context of Flow. And so now, if you upgrade your DLP policy, which you can do, and you can learn about that in the blog post there, you actually can go and target these within the context of a DLP policy. So if you want to have a specific exclusion or exclusion policy for certain custom connectors that might be being built within your organization, you can now have that level of control at a DLP level. Cool. And so I'm going to hand it over to Kent, who's going to take all the spiel that I've walked you through and make it real for his company. Excuse me.
So good morning. As mentioned, my name is Kent Weir. I lead the enterprise architecture, integration, and analytics practice at Interpipeline. We're an energy transportation company in Calgary, Canada. So we're relatively new on our journey with the Power Platform. We started last November. And having previous experience with the platform, it was something that we were bought in immediately between myself and our senior leadership. So our whole purpose, knowing the capabilities, having experience building apps and flows in the past, is we really wanted to jump on this technology because we see a lot of business benefit of doing so. And so as part of that, like some of our principles around, we want to empower people to be makers. We see the benefit in this tool, so how do we actually allow people to use this so that they can actually drive more business outcomes for the organization? Because at the end of the day, it's not just about what IT wants, it's about what are we doing to help the business actually succeed and move forward. So we want to balance productivity with governance. It doesn't mean that we leave the front doors wide open, but we want to be very practical in terms of how we look at this. And I think a big thing for us is we want to incent the right behavior. Instead of getting people to sign up for trials and P2s and create their own environments and have all this proliferation, I would much rather have the conversation of what do you really need to do in order to accomplish your objective? And then how can we enable you to accomplish that objective instead of creating all of these different environments and all these different assets all over the place that overall are way more difficult to manage than if they were more centralized. And so what I would employ you, if you haven't actually done this, I would go ahead and try to start early in order to implement this governance, implement data loss prevention policies, implement the environment strategies, because it's always more difficult to pull those assets back. And that was something that we did right off the bat, is we created a base DLP policy so that we knew that we had a base level of protection, and then we would basically adjust to business needs. And then the last point is really around treating exceptions as exceptions. There's going to be some scenarios where the business really has a valid use case to use a set of connectors. So probably the most popular scenario is, SharePoint data to Twitter. That gets people nervous in terms of data exfiltration going to Twitter. But if you think about a corporate communications group, their mandate is actually to communicate, and that can be with the public. So instead of them going off and buying some other tool that you have less control over, why don't you try to enable them? And that's where you can use an exception process that James spoke about in order to tailor to their needs. So this is just an example of how we've implemented environments. I think if you're a larger organization, you may find a need to create more, but I think a general principle is less is better, based on some of the things I just mentioned about sprawl. So the first thing that we did is we renamed our default environment, which every licensed user has access to be called personal productivity. So right off the bat, we're welcoming the ability for people to create within that environment. And it's also setting the tone that this is generally around personal or team productivity, but that we do have other avenues for you to take when you do have your production use cases. So as a publicly traded company, we're naturally bound by SOX, or Canadian SOX, which I'm sure most of you are as well. And so we still have to take some of those corporate apps through a formal change process. And this is why we've created both test and production environments where we've basically provided opt-in access as required in order to do naturally the testing and UAT of those Power Apps and Flows, but then have the ability to move those into production. So we're trying to take a very balanced approach where we're sort of taking this new modern technology set, but still aligning to our existing regulatory commitments, whether that be internally or externally. Now, one of the things, we don't want people to be, have to do a lot of manual work in order to govern this environment. So using the management connectors, what we've actually done is gone ahead and built a flow that will detect when new environments are created. And we're going to see a real example of this shortly, where we had someone that went to App in a Day. And what happens when they go to App in a Day? They sign up for a trial and they create their own environment. And so in that case, I get it. It's a short-term need. But it's still, I don't want to have a whole proliferation of these environments. It's just not necessary. If a person has a need, I'd rather have them in our other environments. So what we have is this flow that will run every day. It'll check to see who the environment creator is and if they're part of an Azure AD group. If they are, great, no problem. That means that that's a valid environment that's being created. But otherwise, we're going to send them an email with a nice nudge saying, please move your assets over to another sanctioned environment. We give them contact information, and then we have the ability to enforce that governance through an approval after we've given them a day to think about it, where we can actually go ahead and delete the environment and all of the assets with it. So that does sound dangerous, and it can be. So what we do to be successful is we will do a warm reach out to the environment creator and have a conversation with them so that they understand what's about to happen, and also to get them moving in the right direction. So DLP policies, James touched on this a little bit. Since we are relatively new in this journey, what we do have is just a single tenant-wide DLP policy. And once again, keep things simple, then adjust as the business needs dictate. And so our strategy is we're a big Microsoft customer. We're using Office 365. We're using Azure. We trust Microsoft's data privacy and protection. So we've put all of the Microsoft business-related connectors into our business data group. Then we've taken consumer services like Hotmail, like Gmail, Dropbox, and social media, and put them into the non-business data group. So this ensures that we don't have corporate data leaving through one of those consumer channels. And so generally this works well for us. If we do have needs around, say, corporate communications wanting to do things with social media, that would give us the opportunity to create another environment, a separate DLP policy for just them, and then onboard the appropriate users as required. Now, something that James had mentioned, and we've taken advantage of this, is the ability to manage custom connectors. So today, when you do deploy a custom connector within your environment, it is still bound by DLP. The challenge is it doesn't actually show up in any of your data groups, but it is within the bucket of your default data group. So this means if your default data group is non-business data, you deploy a custom connector, and you want to use it with, say, SharePoint, which is in your business data group, that's where you're going to see a DLP violation. You can actually use PowerShell or the management connectors in order to move this connector into the appropriate data group. So here you're going to see group name HBI, that's high business impact, that's my business data group. And here I've taken this custom connector and been able to publish it into that DLP policy so that we can now manage this as appropriate. Another thing that another tip I would say, another thing that we've leveraged is just using Azure AD groups whenever possible. So we take advantage of Azure AD groups for licensing. So for example, we have quite a few PowerApps P1 licenses because we are using the Common Data Service. So what we can actually do, and we've automated this through the Power Platform as well, is actually assign licenses through that vehicle. So inside of Azure Active Directory, we have a licenses. We create Azure AD groups. What happens is when we put a person into that group, they now get a PowerApps P1 license. We can also use that same security group for a PowerApps as well. So now they get the license and they get access to the app. Now, in the third scenario where if they actually need to access this Power App on their mobile device, we're using Intune. And so what happens there is we can actually push the Power App web or player to their device as well. And so this allows us to streamline a lot of our deployments and governance. So it's just generally a good tip, but I would definitely recommend it if you're not using this, especially when you have people across multiple offices. You don't want to be walking to each of them to download it from the App Store if you don't have to. So let's just take a quick look at what this looks like in real life. So here is this is our tenant, and as you can see, we've got a series of different environments here. We've got a personal productivity. We are involved in a trial for a portal, so you can just ignore that for now. Then we have our prod and test environments. And then we have my buddy Shane here. And Shane was the fellow that went over to App in a Day, and he has a trial, and he has 3 days before it turns into a pumpkin. And we're going to turn it into a pumpkin here pretty quick. So next up is let's talk a little bit about the DLP policies, as I mentioned. So here's our data groups. Here's our business data only. And you can see you've got your typical Azure, Office 365. We've got Q&A Maker, some of the Azure services, Power BI, the Power Platform, et cetera. But then we also have this connector here called Shared CDS. So we have a custom CDS connector that we're using for a specific use case. It'd be great if we could rename that connector, but this is essentially, when you provision it, some of the underlying details. But at least what I can now do is I can manage this. If I wanted to move this from the business data group, I would be able to move it if I wanted to. So that's a tip, not widely known, but something that you can actually leverage and go back to your organizations today with that. So back to my buddy Shane. So let's just flip over to my Flow instance. So now I'm out of the admin experience onto a maker experience. And I have this approval sitting here that's saying, do you want to go ahead and delete this environment? And so we can see that this is the name of the person who created, their user principal, and when it was created. And in this case, there is no real need to go ahead and have this environment. I've already chatted with Shane. We've moved his assets over. I've just been waiting for this presentation to hit the button. And then what can happen is when I go ahead and approve this flow, then we're going to actually see the flow kick in, and it'll actually go ahead and delete the environment, send out communication indicating that we have deleted this environment and that they can make additional arrangements. So I think this is a really important feature in the sense that everyone has different governance needs, but using a combination of PowerShell, using the management connectors, using the Power Platform itself, you actually have the ability to tailor a governance story that works for you. And I think we found a right balance of using the out-of-box experiences with PowerShell and the management connectors in order to tailor the right governance story for us.
Awesome. And we're going to go over the management connectors in a minute here, but I mean, thank you, Kent. That's really awesome. Poor Shane. He's going to come back, so you can applaud him again when he does. All right, so we covered the first four, and that was the media section, so we're about halfway through here. And now we're going to transition on to my favorite topic, which is kind of analytics and monitoring. And as you saw in the previous and you see along the breadcrumb, there's a couple different options that you actually have at your disposal, and you can actually use them in conjunction with each other for both PowerApps and Flow. And the first one is around the Office 365 activity logging capability, which you can enable for PowerApps and Flow, and it's actually if you have enabled it at the Office level, as we'll get in here, you actually it automatically starts flowing for PowerApps and Flow. It's also available for Dynamics 365 if you enable it for those organizations as well. And what this does, and we'll get to in a second, I'll show you the events that we emit, but it actually emits certain events that happen, especially around the management plane operations within the PowerApps and Flow service. And you can go to protection.office.com, which is the actual Office 365 Security and Compliance Center, and they provide an experience for querying those logs that we emit there, as well as all the other logs for the other Office 365 products. But what's also really awesome is they also have an API, REST API, for querying that data. It's just really built on top of an Exchange API. It's a REST API, and there's even some Flow templates around how you can even call that today for like a new flow created and an edit flow created. They're actually built on top of some of the activity logs that we create. So it really extensible option as well. And what we do for Flow is we emit all of the kind of CRUD Flow events around Flow assets being created, as well as the permissions for Flow. So if you're changing the Flow owners, an event is emitted in that case. And then for PowerApps, we similarly, when an app is created or deleted, or if those permissions or metadata are changed, as well as for PowerApps, we also send an event when an app is launched as well. And so these are super powerful because not only can you go and trigger off that, you can go and query and look back to see what people have done, but you can also pipe that data into your own reporting system if you want through those APIs. They actually have pretty good integration options today. But that actually requires you to kind of set it up and kind of query for particular events. If you're just looking for, sorry, I'm going to go to the next one that shows both. If you're looking for just kind of some out-of-box reports that show trends and analytics around what's happening within your organization, we actually have a bunch available today. The admin analytics are actually available through the Power Platform Admin Center. I'm going to show them in a second. They cover kind of the swath of different services that we have here. We're going to walk into how we provide a view on your available capacity within your tenant. We provide usage and performance information for both the Common Data Service, PowerApps, and Flow. And it's scoped to an environment concept, the environment concept that we talked about that keeps coming back for the PowerApps, Flow, and Common Data Service. We provide a 28-day retention for that data. And today, you actually have to have either admin rights to that environment in order to view it through the Admin Center, or if you're a global admin, you can see all environments and you can see all of that. And for Maker Analytics, I'm not going to cover it today, but a similar set of out-of-box reports are available from make.powerapps.com and flow.microsoft.com. If you go and you look at you basically go to the context menu for your Canvas app or Flow, you actually can go and see analytics for those apps just today within those Maker experiences. And I just wanted to show you really quick what I'm talking about here. So this is, I've gone to, if you go to aka.ms/ppac, you go to the Power Platform Admin Center. This is the preview admin center where we are planning on merging all those 3 different admin center experiences for Dynamics, PowerApps, and Flow by the end of this year. And the first report that we have here is something that we launched just a couple months ago, which is this is your new view around your available capacity that's available within your tenants. This is what you actually have either accrued as a part of some of your user entitlements, or you can actually purchase standalone. This is very, very important in the new model because as we move away from 2 environments per P2 license, we're moving towards a model which will be rolling out later this month where you have to, purchasing available environments is dictated based off of the available database capacity you have within your tenant. And so you need 1 gigabyte available to actually provision a new environment in this new model. And I'm actually really excited about this, and I know the ALM session is very excited about this because it allows you now to have a much more seamless DevOps process that's not restricted by the 2 environments per user, and you're only dictated based on the available capacity that you have across your tenant. And this is actually the available capacity, by the way, for the Microsoft tenant. We have just a small number of available capacity of 165 terabytes of available database capacity. But another thing I wanted to also highlight is our analytics reports for PowerApps and Flow. I'm just going to show this one really quick. This is the PowerApps location report. And this is actually, as you can see here, you can filter this per environment. This is actually the environment that we've deployed a suite of applications that's used centrally at Microsoft called the Thrive apps. So we have kind of a home app, we have Time and Away, we have Kudos, we have a way of how we provide feedback for our review process. And it's all deployed within a single environment. We have a production live environment for this. And this is the usage of those applications over the past 28 days. Just to kind of show you, these apps are being launched tens of thousands of times, across really the whole globe. And this is how global a company that we are at Microsoft. This is how wide of usage that we have for the Power Platform. Just in one suite of apps that are deployed in this environment, it really goes to show you. I'm sure a lot of you has had your hands raised in terms of those big companies are in a very, very similar boat. And this is kind of that problem that we're tackling. And what's really awesome is, as we're talking about building processes, we have those out-of-box reports that provide visibility over the adoption of those apps after you roll them out, which is really, really cool. Similarly, for Flow, and by the way, it's just all under the Analytics tab here. Flow, we also have a series of reports, and I'm just kind of showing and pinpointing a couple of them, but all this is available today, and you can go check it out. For Flow, you simply have a view of the runs and usage of Flow within those environments as well. And what's really, really cool about the Flow analytics is that we also have reports here that outline new flows that have been created or shared, as you see there. And there's also a view of connectors, so the connectors that are being used across the flows in that particular environment. And these are some really, really powerful things you can go check out right away, and I would urge you to do so because they are just an out-of-box way for you, if you're just getting started, from understanding the adoption within your company. But say, okay, that's great, those are tied to environments, but hey, James, what if I have a ton of environments? What if I have a huge company? I have very probably custom reporting needs, right? And the really awesome thing that we have, and it gets to kind of what Kent had shown a little bit earlier, was we also have a set of tools for you to generate your own data, pull your own reports over what assets are being created within our service. And so the PowerShell commandlets that we launched in preview, I guess it was about a year ago, and the management connectors, which came out last fall in preview as well, they are extremely, extremely powerful tools. And we're going to walk through them and show you some examples later. But really what these are is these are just layers on top of the same admin and management APIs that our admin center and maker experiences sit on top of. And all we've done is we've wrapped them up and we've exposed them through the lens of PowerShell. So these are available in the PowerShell gallery, and as actual connectors that are available through PowerApps and Flow. And this allows you to do some very, very critical things from a reporting perspective, and then we're going to talk about how you can act on it later, as Kent was showing, but this is even just from a pulling of data perspective. You can actually pull all this in a very, very automated way. And one example, a couple examples of this is, the first is an example script that I wrote last year, which just kind of downloads an activity report for your entire tenant, pulls which connectors are being used across your apps and flows, and it's just a way of kind of getting a download of data that you can then go expose. I think it just downloads some CSV files, and you can go and expose that and visualize it through Power BI. But then you also have the management connectors, because through Flow, you also all of a sudden you can automate your governance story. One of the templates here that actually Ken helped create back in the day was one that runs, I think, every week or so, and it actually provides a report of activity that is actually created, like new apps, new flows, and new custom connectors that are created within your company. And this flow just sends you an email, and you can go, but part of the power of Flow is you can then go customize it. Leverage those 250 some odd connectors, throw that data into a storage, have approval processes around some of them. Really, it's up to you. But they're also extremely powerful from a reporting perspective. And so I'm going to hand it back to Ken, who's also going to talk about what he's been doing.
And so part of the unique part of my role is I've got accountabilities on the security side from a cybersecurity perspective, but also accountabilities in terms of where are we going as an organization with technology and how are we using it to drive impact. And so I leverage the analytics dashboards quite frequently. And there's a couple different lenses that you want to look through. Number one is that, from a security audit governance perspective, like what are our users doing? Are they doing the right things? Are they doing things they shouldn't be doing? And then I would say there's the flip side of that, or the other side of the coin. And then you look at it from an organizational change management perspective. And it's like, hey, there's users that are doing good things. How do we actually empower them to do more? Because we can actually then scale. And so we're using this from both perspectives in terms of like, what are our numbers? Are people ramping up? And these are some dashboards right from our tenants itself. So you can see that we have had ramp up and that people are starting to use the platform and leverage it. Another scenario that we do use is errors, right, and error handling. People generally have concerns about what about that runaway flow that's going to create all these errors and people aren't paying attention and they're going to use our quota and then we're going to have to pay a lot of money and send a big check to Microsoft. And so you can use this report as well to monitor that as well. And what's the irony of this is I was like a culprit. I saw there was one flow that had like hundreds of errors and I'm like, well, who created this flow? And then sure enough, it was me. So we have a flow where we will monitor in Azure DevOps to see when a work item has been completed, and then we'll publish a kudos inside of the Microsoft, or into a Microsoft team channel saying, good job so-and-so for completing that work task. So it ends up I had a connection issue, and so I guess it wasn't totally my fault, but it was my flow that was failing. But it's, once again, visibility gives you insight, so that you understand how your environment and how your assets are being used. The last one is connectors, which is naturally sort of the same coin that we have to think about. Are people using these consumer connectors that we don't want them to? Are there concerns around data exfiltration? But then on the flip side is, what are the patterns that people are using? Are people predominantly connecting to SharePoint or to Office 365 email? Or is it a custom connector? Now we actually get this insight, so we can actually then use that data to drive future investments as well. Another example of using analytics is when you deploy something, how do you want to measure the success of that new solution or that new app? So what we have here is we had a corporate leadership summit, I guess it was probably about 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago. And so we built an app for this event, a Power App. Sitting on top of CDS, and we had about 200 leaders in the company that were attending this summit from all over the province, and we wanted to actually use this as an opportunity to get Power Apps and the Power Platform in their hands. So it was a show and tell opportunity for us. So naturally, we did a fair amount of work to get this set up. We wanted to know, are people using this? Was this actually a worthwhile exercise for us? And so what we did is we leveraged the analytics in order to gauge how many people were accessing the app over a course of 2 days. And so you'll see, obviously, we're doing some testing, but the second last data point from the right was after day one, where it's like, okay, we've got about 50 of the 200 people using the app. Not bad, but not what it could be. So then what we did on day two is created some campaigns in order to drive further engagement inside of the application, and we could see that that number doubled, and we had over 100 leaders now using the app instead. So we can actually, much like A/B testing, you can actually use these analytics to try to understand how people are using it, create campaigns, then measure, and actually look for greater outcomes.
Really good point, because normally when I talk about this, I talk about it more from people entering and kind of just getting a lay of the land, but they're also extremely powerful tools for going forward as you actually roll out solutions across your company. You may even have multiple apps, multiple environments going in parallel. And so there's a lot of data and a lot of insight to be gained from those reports. So we're staying on track, and we've covered about 2/3 of the stuff here. And really what we're going to focus on next is a lot of actually what you've seen from Kent along the way, which is like ways of automating and taking action and employing policies and enforcing good best practice. But we're going to talk about and go through really quick some of the tools that we have and go into a little bit of detail. And the first of which is, one that we were just talking about for the purposes of reporting, but they're also like both the PowerShell commandlets and the management connectors, I think as you've seen today, also incredible tools for enforcing the policies and processes you want to put in place, because they really put the power of automation in your hands, especially in conjunction with Flow, but it allows you to take advantage of the Power Platform as administrators, right? You can become not only, adopters of the platform, in addition to kind of managing how that adoption is being driven across your company. That's my way of plugging and driving our makers. But why I plug that so much is because, I think through both PowerShell and the management connectors, you actually enable a very wide set of different scenarios that you can go and tackle. And by the way, it depends on your skill set as well, but PowerShell versus the management connectors, they lend themselves to different types of purposes and different skills. It's really the same set of capabilities that are available. It just depends on kind of the job that you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to do bulk updates, you're trying to pull data, PowerShells might be a little bit easier for you depending on your skills. And the management connectors are especially important if you want to build your own app experience on either from a maker or an admin perspective, or start to automate those workflows on top of it. You can automate environment creation, as we saw what Kent's been doing within his company. You can get alerts around new assets being created, as we saw with that template. There's also and these are some examples of templates that I've created over time, which is, if you want to have insight and take action over certain environments being created, certain apps being created, certain connectors being used, or connectors being added, you actually can leverage a lot of powerful capabilities within those connectors, because they expose all the metadata of that application. They expose who has access to it. They expose which connectors are used by it. And it's really up to you to kind of take with that and figure out, how does that process make sense for your company? How are you going to go and drive the right behavior within your company? And just talking about that really quick, that kind of being proactive and leveraging kind of these atomic capabilities and taking them and running with them. I want Kent to walk through a couple more examples really quick around how he's employing that within Inner Pipeline.
So earlier I showed you the example of how to manage environments using these management connectors, and I essentially built an email solution that based upon that same pattern of a recurrence that runs and checks for membership in an Azure AD group and then does some logic and responds. And so what happened was, as I mentioned, we were early on this journey. We introduced Office 365 late last year, around the same time frame as the Power Platform, naturally. And so what happened was, our users who hadn't had access to technology or this level of technology before were like kids in candy store, where it's like they're in the Office 365 waffle, that portal, and they're clicking icons. Ooh, what does this one do? Ooh, what does this one do? And then what we were starting to see is people stumbling onto Flow. And they're like, oh, okay, I'm on Flow. And then it's like, oh, templates, that sounds interesting. Next thing you know, they're provisioning their first Flow. And so, mission accomplished from a Microsoft perspective in terms of onboarding. But now, what do they do, right? It's kind of like, now, I need more info. How do I use this more? What are the other capabilities? And so what we did is we actually wanted people using the platform because we see value in it. So what we've done is we will detect when a user creates their first Flow. Because if they're in an Azure AD group, we know that they've already been part of this process, but otherwise, they'll get this email with a series of links. And there's an element here of, we're giving you permission to use this app. I think a lot of IT departments don't like this idea that icons just appear, and end users feel that, hey, if the icon is there, I can use it. And then here, we're erasing that doubt altogether. So we also include some blurb about, you must still align with our existing corporate policies. There's a little blurb about data loss prevention. So if you try to create a flow that's, automating your work with your consumer services, it's going to get stopped. And then we also have other resources around Microsoft-related resources, but even our own resources, such as an internal Yammer Club for Flow users, where we'll publish the Flow blog news, but also give people the opportunity to participate in a peer-to-peer community where they can actually ask for help. And certainly from an IT perspective, we're happy to help, but we also want to create this culture across the different business units where they're also helping each other as well.
Yeah, I think what's actually interesting there is, like, you think about us from a product team perspective, like, we're trying to, in all our experiences, especially the maker experiences, convert people to be able to build an app as easy as possible. Like, that signal of something even just arriving on our page and getting started is such an important signal to us as a product team that we want to try to make it as easy as possible to convert. You have to think about how powerful a signal it is within your company that someone actually built an app, right? They actually got started. That's an opportunity that you shouldn't and can't squander, right? Like, to actually drive them towards your best practices or your resources or your training or your champions within your company. And it really think of it like that. And I think when you do, it's an amazing what a community you can start building. And I don't know how many people are within your Yammer Club now within even your company, Kent.
So we're more than 50 from a Flow perspective, and then Power BI, we're doing the same thing. It's upwards of 100 as well, right? So, and this is very organic, where people are just, we're not putting it in people's face, but we're trying to empower and encourage people as well.
I just think it's a really, really powerful way of kind of fostering people that are already so passionate about something and coming from a supportive angle.
Absolutely, yeah. And so this is another example, and this, once again, like that coin keeps showing up here where there's two sides to the coin. And naturally, you know, an administrator wants to understand what's going on in their environment. So what this report does, and this is a template that James had previously shown, but it'll identify any new flows, any new Power Apps, and any new connectors, whether they be custom, Microsoft first party, or third party. And so once again, we want to understand like how people are using these tools. And so we've actually used this as an outreach tool, to James's point, that when we see a new face show up in this email digest, we'll actually reach out to them. Do you have any questions? Is there anything we can help you with? Are you blocked? Did you want to come to an upcoming training session that we're hosting? And then on the flip side, you know, connectors are always something that is a little bit concerning for administrators, where it's like, how do I know when a new connector arrives? How do I know that a business user isn't going to start using this right away and I don't have a chance to get in front of it? Well, this is your opportunity. As soon as a connector lands within one of your environments, it'll show up within this email. And then this gives you the opportunity as an administrator to modify your DLP policies as required. You can even automate this as well if you want, where you could have an approval that would say, hey, this is your new connector. Hit approve to put in, you know, business data. Hit reject to put it into non-business data. You have that control and that flexibility and can automate all of that as well.
Cool. And I know we've shown some of the same examples today. Sorry, I'm going to go this way. But one of the really cool things, and if you're at the pre-day yesterday, I know we walked through this a little bit, but one of the awesome things that our customer success team has put together is what we're calling a Center of Excellence Toolkit. And really what it is it's a bunch of examples of best practices and common scenarios that we've actually talked about today, and even more. And they've pulled it into kind of a single download that you can go pull down. I would suggest that, you know, these are some of the more advanced scenarios that we've talked about. There's a flow here that pulls that actually has a custom connector to the Office 365 audit logs that we've talked about, those activity logs, and it actually pulls it into a CDS database that you are going to deploy. It contains a solution that you go deploy in a CDS database. It comes along with a series of flows and Canvas apps for facilitating a compliance process, sending an email, as well as a Power BI dashboard for visualizing the data that you've synced into CDS from the activity logs, right? And a lot of the goal and behind this, and there's even those welcome emails and an app catalog experience around like apps that have been created within your company. And you know, I'm not going to be able to go through all this today, but really the purpose why we put this together is as a starting point, you know, because these were coming up as such common scenarios across so many companies that we wanted to arm each of you with a starting point where you can go take these and go customize them using the same Power Platform skills that, you know, are being discussed in many other sessions today. So hopefully one thing, if nothing I leave you today with is the fact that, you know, you all as administrators can become probably one of the top power addicts within your company. You don't have to start from scratch. You can start from here and then build on top of that and tailor it towards your particular policies, your particular company, your particular champions that are starting to use the Power Platform within your company or may have already used it. And I've just started playing around with this myself. We kind of just finished it this week. So love any feedback around this too. We're going to continue to build on this. And I think even some of these will probably end up pulling into the product over time, but it doesn't need to wait for that. You can get started right away. And just a couple examples of what's in here. This is actually one of my personal favorite ones. It's what we call the DLP Policy Editor. This is actually what I wish we had in the DLP experience in the Admin Center, but that's okay. This actually is a Canvas app for you to understand, kind of think of it as a preview that as I change my policy, which apps and flows would be impacted by the changes that I'm trying out. And then you actually can go and kind of push those changes back into those DLP policies. Also a really cool tool just to see and visualize which connectors are being used by apps and flows already within your company. And this is actually the Power BI dashboard that's included in there. That's part of that telemetry that gets synced into CDS. There's actually a Power BI dashboard that's a part of this that actually just connects to the CDS data that's been pulled in. This is some test data, but what's really going to be cool is like, what does this look like for your company's data, right? If you go and roll this out. And anyway, so again, if you're curious what that link is, there it is. It's COE Starter Kit. It's the AKMS link. And so we've covered a lot, and I know we went really fast over a lot of stuff. The recording and the deck will be online. One thing I want to shamelessly plug is that if you are interested in giving feedback to, as we're rolling out the new Admin Center, as we're rolling out new capabilities, we love people to be involved, give us feedback, participate in some of the research of the new experiences that we roll out. All of you have the appropriate background to participate. If you are interested, sign up there. It's super valuable to us as we're especially rolling out new things going forward. And then there's also a couple key sessions that I would call your attention to that are going on this week. One is later today. That's the one we talked about. There's also one that our customer success team is holding tomorrow morning around BRK2004, around building a center of excellence. And then I also have a session tomorrow morning as well after that one that's talking more of some of the forward-looking admin capabilities. I'll go into a lot more detail around the changes we're doing around capacity and provisioning in that session. And actually, Manuel will be joining me as well in that session. And she'll make me look bad in terms of my speaking abilities. So anyway, thank you all for coming. If you have questions, I think we have a couple minutes. There are 2 microphones there. And hopefully this was informative for you. I know I appreciated it, so thank you all.